Hey everyone, welcome to the Psych to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm Ray Christner, and with me,
Paul Wagner.
So Paul, another Master in Practice episode today, taking a topic we haven't touched on, but one I think is incredibly important, and that's sleep, but specifically, how do we help kids sleep independently?
And, kind of our second take on a self-help book. And, I think it does a great job. Banish Bedtime Battles, written by Dr. Flannery-Schroeder, as well as Dr. Chelsea Tucker. And, for those of you who aren't familiar, Ellen is a licensed psychologist who specializes in anxiety disorders in children. She's a professor of psychology and the director of clinical psychology program at the University of Rhode Island, and the co-director of high performance parenting. And Chelsea is a licensed psychologist specializing in treating children and families with anxiety, is our other co-founder of High Performance Parenting. And, I had a great time sitting down and talking with both about the book, and, kind of interesting to hear the foundations really coming more from program or training that they were looking to implement and saying, hey, let's kind of write this in for parents. And I think the book reads really well, and I think it lends itself well to helping parents out with banishing those bedtime battles.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. You mentioned about this, kind of self-help kind of book take. And, one of the reasons I think it was so important we were including this book is, gosh, I see it so much clinically, parents that struggle with getting kids to sleep independently. And what a great resource. So for me, when they were talking, one of the things I really appreciated, I guess is my takeaway, is they took this idea of parenting styles and applied it to kind of how we work with our kids with sleep, but they did it in such a kind of user-friendly way. And the terminology just makes sense. It gets it out of this heady psychological theories and really makes it applicable and I think easy to read. And, my kids are older, but there were times as I read through the book, I went, gosh, this would just been so easy to do. So really appreciated that about it.
One thing I think the book does really well is, it really encourages this individualization. So, it's not just kind of a one size fits all, but really this encouragement of like, hey, for your family, find what fits. And here's this structure to follow, but it's your structure to really kind of fill out and saying, where do we need to focus on? Where do we maybe not necessarily need, to put so much attention, and really helping to shape it in a way that fits. And so, it was a pleasure to talk with both. And I think that really comes through both in our conversation as well as through the book.
Yeah. And all of you listening, I hope you share with us some takeaways or things that you appreciated with the book. I hope you check it out. Great resource for families. And I have to admit, I got a few bedtime tips myself. So that's always good too.
Well, and with that, we hope you enjoy this Masters in Practice episode, Banish Bedtime Battles.
Chelsea and Ellen, thanks so much for joining us on the Psych to Practice podcast. We're glad you could be with us this evening.
It's so nice to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yes,
absolutely.
We're so happy to be here.
Yeah, this is great. And so this is a topic that we're going to talk about tonight that we haven't done yet. So we're excited to talk a little bit about the book you have coming out. But before we kind of get into content, we like to let kind of our guests tell us a little bit about their background so that we can have our listeners kind of understand kind of how you all got into the field. So Ellen, I guess we'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what got you into working in mental health and working with children?
Sure. I'm going to go ways back because that's where the story starts. It starts with my first class in psychology during my high school years. And when I took the class, I It was the first class I loved studying for. I couldn't wait to do my homework. Everything I read just was so interesting and fascinating and made perfect sense. And that was sort of, I was hooked from the first class onward. So then, of course, I went to college, majored in psychology, although I did briefly consider economics. And then I just had the bug from the get-go. I was particularly interested in kids. Ended up in grad school with Dr. Phil Kendall, who did work on childhood anxiety disorders. And at that time, when I started working with him, I didn't have a particular interest in anxiety, but boy, did it ever grow. So that's it. Here I am all these years later.
It's amazing how many times we hear people's stories start with an intro to psychology class. That's the, whether it's high school or college, it's the hook for a lot of people. So Chelsea, tell us a little bit about what got you into the field.
My interest, it started back in high school when I shadowed the school psychologist for a day as part of a class project. And I thought his work was really interesting. And he was surprisingly shocked at how interested I was in the job that he was doing. That was something that really stuck out to me. It's kind of like, really? You want to follow me around for a day? Okay, I guess people hadn't really done that before. But I was hooked from there. In college, I majored in psychology right off the bat, and I joined and became president of the psychology club, where I got to connect with lots of like-minded students and professors and get engaged in research. So from there, I went straight into school psychology for graduate school. And that's where I got did with Ellen, and the rest was history.
Wow. So yeah, it's interesting. So starting with an observation, so what made you decide to observe the school psychologist to start with?
I was taking a college level human development course in high school, and there was a end of the year project where you had to kind of explore some different career options. And I don't remember exactly how I landed on observing the school psychologist. But as soon as I learned that there was a mental health specialist in a school, that was news to me. I was fascinated and thrilled that there was someone who kids could go to for mental health needs.
Yeah, that's such an important push. And, I always loved when students wanted to do that when I worked in schools, because I think it's just such a great way to grow the field. And we definitely need professionals in these realms. So let's kind of talk a little bit about moving into the book a little bit. So, this book coming out, Banish Bedtime Battles, which is a great title. What led to the two of you putting this book together?
So it was during the pandemic. Chelsea and I were putting together a parent consultation firm. And as part of that parent consultation firm, we decided we were going to do some side projects. We were going to do an online parenting course. And so we put our heads together and said, what is the one problem that we get the most questions about? What do parents come with us most frequently? What's the problem at home that they want to solve? And we both were like, bedtime battles. That's it. It was very clear. That was a really big one. So we set out to create this online course about how to get your school-age child to sleep in their own bed. And before we knew it, we looked at each other and we said we didn't make a parenting course. We just wrote a book. Yeah. So that's how it happened. It was a little unintentional, but a lot of fun.
That's how I think a lot of books come out. They're we don't expect them, and then it's just the right topic. It was interesting when I saw the book that it was going to be coming out. As a clinician working with kids, I would say 70% of the families I work with, something around sleep is an issue. And there's not a lot of great resources once you get beyond, that kind of preschool years. So this is, I think, a great topic and great resource for families. So yeah, thanks for being here to talk about it.
And kind of piggyback off what Ray was saying there, like I found myself, I was, going through the book, like it felt like it was like these various like chapters, and like, each chapter seemed like it was kind of like this different, week in building up, like, developing plans, and then really kind of assessing, looking at different strategies and interventions. And, what I really kind of found is that it's trying to keep a flexible base, but also like holding true to the mental health components of promoting independence, reducing anxiety, and, really encouraging it to also be this collaborative process. And so I guess, for our listeners, I'm curious if you can, hard to do, but maybe summarizing some of those elements that really help with establishing a positive bedtime routine for school-age kids.
I'll say, I'm not sure this will directly answer that question, at least not to start. But I think when we were writing the book, one of the things that we really wanted it to do was not only to solve the bedtime battle problem, but we also wanted the book to improve parenting. And so we knew if parents were going to be successful implementing a new bedtime routine that included having their child sleep on their own, we needed to be sure that they were strong in a number of foundational parenting skills. So we added that in, as well as we knew that if kids were going to be successful in sleeping on their own, they needed some coping skills. So we decided to sort of include that. And I'll just comment for a moment too on the format of the book, which is it's a 6-week plan. So the idea is that parents read one chapter a week for 6 weeks. And in the 6th week, their child is sleeping independently.
So we probably don't have to sell anyone on how important sleep is for health and well-being. Parents of children, young children, have the, I say, honor and responsibility to help prepare their child for a lifetime of healthy sleep habits. And there's a wealth, as you said, Ray, of information and resources available to parents on how to facilitate sleep for their newborn, their infant, toddlers. And then it sort of drops off from there. But we know that those infants and toddlers grow into school-aged children, and that group of children, their needs are different at bedtime. And that's because at that age, children can leave their bed. They're no longer in a crib. They can walk out. They can develop irrational fears of the dark, of monsters, of being alone. They learn to sleep away from home. So that can bring about a whole new set of challenges for parents who may not otherwise be prepared. So we're hoping that Banish Bedtime Battles is, a solution to that problem where kids can, if they haven't already, develop the strong foundational bedtime routines, which include nutrition, hygiene, communication, physical touch, and all of that completed in kind of an unhurried manner over the course of about 30 minutes or so at night. And there's room for family personalization with each of those elements. For example, the communication part might look like, swapping stories about their day while they're snuggling, parent and child, that is, or coming together in prayer or reading a book. But Ellen and I found that those were the essential components to a bedtime routine. And,
one part that you both kind of just shared there was like the different elements that, are unique to each family. And, I don't remember which chapter it was covered in, but it talked about parenting styles. And I guess in terms of that chapter, like there was a few others, and I certainly don't want to, myself to go in depth. I want to hear from both of you. Like, what are some of those different parenting styles that, our listeners can kind of maybe self-identify with? And, there's a great part in there about how we can maybe start to make some transitions into a bit more of that balanced approach.
In the research literature, there are 4 main parenting types. They have names. We have renamed them for our book, just to make them a little more accessible. Some of the research names are a tad bit confusing. So I'll just sort of briefly review the 4 main parenting types. There's the no nonsense type, which is a parent who is kind of my way or the highway. They are high in sort of control. They expect their child to behave. They often have children who are quite obedient, as you might imagine, since there are a lot of parental rules and kids are held to those standards and rules very firmly. But the kids oftentimes will show some rebellion, particularly in adolescence. So they might, the parents might win out with some strong or strict obedience early on, but it often doesn't serve the child well as they age. So that no nonsense style is kind of low in the dimension of warmth. So the parents are a little harsh, maybe overly strict. And it's very high in the firmness, right? So firmness being strict, controlled, it's very high on that dimension. And then let's see, there is a parenting style that we call anything goes, which is a parenting style that's really characterized by parents who are very permissive and allow their child to do some or a lot of the decision making. So these are parents that are very warm. Whatever you want, you can have it. And they're very low on firm. So I'm not setting rules. I'm not holding you to rules because I'm going to kind of let you decide what you want to do because anything goes. I'm saving the healthiest parenting style for last. So another parenting style is you're on your own. This is a parenting style that is kind of an uninvolved parent or an under-involved parent who is sort of letting the child raise themselves. So there aren't a lot of rules. There's low firmness, but there's also low warmth. There aren't tight and warm and close connections between parent or child. And then the 4th parenting style, which is the one that we're really advocating for in the book, is one that we call balanced, which is warm and firm. So a parent with very close connections to their child, but also really has some firm rules that they are very consistent with. And that balanced style certainly has been borne out through research to be the preferred parenting style. That said, every parent at one time or another, particularly across different contexts and situations, will probably engage in all of the 4 different styles at different times. But largely, when we a lot of times when we introduce these parenting styles to parents, they can sort of readily identify the one that is most consistent with their style of parenting.
And I love the rename. I think you're right. I think the research kind of gives these names that just don't connect with people. So when I saw kind of how you describe them, I think that makes it easy for parents to self-identify as well. It's just kind of a clear piece. So how do these different parenting styles then, how does that impact a child's sleep?
Great question. So when a child is, let's say, so a parenting style is the way the parent interacts with the child or responds to their behavior. So if a child is emotional at bedtime or oppositional, the way that parent responds can really help determine whether that child behavior gets strengthened or keeps happening. And so if a parent responds in a no nonsense response to, I don't care if you don't want to go to bed, like get to bed, and that's the end of it. The child is still going to feel emotional or still resist the directive to go to bed. And now they're alone with that feeling and perhaps ruminating on it. And they don't necessarily have the skill to manage that emotion or to help stave it off from happening again in the future. But with our warm and firm parenting style, the more balanced parenting style, the parent has an opportunity to help that child recognize that their emotion is valid. All emotions are valid, but not all expressions of that emotion are necessarily expected in any given situation. But that child recognizes that their emotion makes sense for the situation. Maybe it doesn't, but it's okay if they feel it anyway. And then they learn a skill. The parent can help them learn to manage that emotion and still follow through on the directive anyway. So now they're sort of teaming up with that parent to be able to achieve the outcome that the parent is looking for.
And one of the pieces I think that really kind of stands out is really trying to recognize what the goal is. And the goal isn't only independence with sleep, but also the ability to feel comforted and self-soothing, through that warmth, because, it sounds like the no nonsense parent can get the child to sleep independently. It's just not very successful sleep. And it's, it doesn't sound very pleasant. But in that ability to create and foster security, they're able to then develop some of the coping skills through that parenting style. And, I guess, what are some of those coping skills that feel the most effective that parents can pull on? And, certainly they're going through the book, that they're going to get a wealth of that information. But, what are some of those that stand out that maybe, until they're able to get their hands on it, they can then, maybe start to implement here?
Sure. I would say that anxiety is really common at bedtime. So that's probably one of the biggest hindrances when you're putting a child to bed, a child who might be afraid of the dark or concerned about being alone or worried about a burglar breaking in. And so when you're worried, your autonomic nervous system or your fight or flight or sympathetic nervous system response starts revving up. And one of the things that we want kids to be able to do is to sort of turn that off a little bit, to calm their bodies down, which, we include explicit directions in the book about how to do mindful breathing. So taking deep breaths to really tell the body, hey, there's nothing dangerous around. You can calm down when you're taking deep breaths. Your body turns off that fight or flight. And then also relaxation training. So we give, scripts and additional instructions for how parents can instruct or teach their child to do progressive muscle relaxation, which in and of itself can certainly help the body to relax. But I like to kind of think of it as training for helping helping a child to understand or recognize when they have a tense muscle and to be able to sort of automatically relax that muscle. But kids even tell us that doing that progressive muscle relaxation training, so tightening and tensing muscle groups and then relaxing them, they say that just doing that process can help them to be relaxed. So it's a wonderful thing to do while you're lying in bed, potentially with a parent, or sitting on the couch with a parent prior to going up to bed. It's just a wonderful way to calm down the body and quiet the mind to sort of ready everyone for going to bed, or at least ready the child for going to bed.
And, hearing that, it's, promoting self-soothing behaviors and, how does that compare to some of maybe some of the more common responses, at least as I'm thinking about the therapy office of, they need their blanket, they need their favorite stuffed animal, they need, the nightlight, working to almost trying to create this environmental response versus this more self-soothing response that's coming from the child themselves. Well, what's the difference there in terms of effectiveness?
Sure. So Well, you're describing some kind of external like items and objects that can be paired with sleep, and ultimately sleep associations can be formed when sleep, bedtime, and this other item like a stuffed animal, a blanket, the hum of a fan is repeatedly paired with sleep. But the downside to you relying on those items is that they're not always available. The power can go out. The stuffed animal can get lost. Not all of these conditions can be made available at a grandparent's house or at a friend's home. And so when a child can learn some coping skills that requires only themselves, their thoughts and their body and their breath, it's really empowering for them. They can take those skills anywhere, and nobody needs to know that they're even using them if they don't want them to. So we find that that is a really powerful way to help children become independent and really feel independent.
And I think that's such a common piece where, like, if I'm working with a kiddo and they're like, oh, I'm having these friends, but I feel left out because I don't want to go over to their house because I think it's going to be embarrassing that, I need my blanket, or I need my stuffed animal, and I don't want them to make fun of me. And so I think there's, especially with this population of school-age children, social dynamics are coming in, and we're starting to make some comparisons, and where it's then formation of shame, formation of avoidance. We're missing out on some really cool opportunities. So, such a positive piece to say, how do we promote these things, especially these things that we can be a bit more discreet with, that really can also give us more opportunities as well.
Paul, if I could just add to that,
yeah.
One of the things that those sort of sleep associations or those conditions or objects that are required when a child needs to go to sleep, they also take away from a child's ability to be able to say, I can do it on my own. I did it on my own. If they have to have the fan, or they need a particular blanket or a stuffed animal or a pillow arrangement, it prevents them from being able to sort of take the credit for their independent sleep, which I think is so important for feeling like a self-confident and competent kid. And we want them to feel that.
And, I think that blends really well. That it was one of the latter chapters. I don't recall if it was quite chapter 5 or that week 5 chapter, but, talking about bringing the child in and celebrating their own success, and, working to make these creative ways that they can connect with. And I guess, talk a little bit more about the importance and value of the child being a part of the process, and this just not all being, something that's from the parents' actions or directive.
I think it's really important for parents and kids to sort of use a collaborative or a team approach. So a child who's afraid of going to sleep on their own because there's scary noises and there might be a burglar, or, there's a variety of scary things, monsters under the bed. But if you're doing it with a parent, so we're in this together, we're going to develop a plan together, it's more reassuring to the child. Of course, we want the child to ultimately be independent, but to know that your parent is there guiding you, they're sort of, supporting you, cheering you on, that really sort of goes a long way, I think, in helping the child be motivated for independent sleep.
Yeah, I'm curious, kind of moving on to maybe a little different topic, but one of the things that I see with many kids that come in is how many are using some supplement to help them go to sleep, whether that be like an over-the-counter melatonin or various things. What are your thoughts or views on the use of those things to help with sleep?
So the melatonin supplements are really popular these days. And a lot of parents administer melatonin supplements and perhaps other kinds of antihistamine products that are designed or hoped to help with achieving sleep onset. The truth is that those items, they're not regulated or monitored by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So there's not enough oversight for me to be comfortable promoting those products to children. And there's not enough long-term research on the effects of these over-the-counter medicines. And so, Ellen and I, we believe that our book, Banish Bedtime Battles, is a terrific alternative to those over-the-counter medicines meant to help kids achieve sleep. Our book is, and the families who've used our book and found it really helpful is proof that there are alternative and safer ways to help kids fall asleep.
And I think that it's, what I really appreciated about reading the book is that I think the way it's laid out is not as intimidating for parents. In that I think sometimes, they might, whether they're talking to a counselor or their pediatrician, and it's like, oh, set a bedtime routine. And most parents, they may not even have a good one themselves. So, to really, as you went through the book, this idea of this can be accomplished in 6 weeks. And I love the chapter a week kind of process. It makes it less intimidating. And I have found in just my own work, when we can get parents to work in that fashion, there's no need for looking at those supplements. And it might not be as quick, but what I find with parents and with kids is the quality of their sleep and their family time by setting these routines is unparalleled. I mean, it's just, I've had parents go, oh my gosh, my favorite time with my child is those few minutes that we snuggle in bed and talk about each other's day. There's so much other value, I think, to what you all have put out there than just the fact that it's going to help sleep. I think it also helps connection, which I think in the wild world that we have right now, that's such an important piece.
That's a really important point. And sometimes it's a little bit of a stumbling block as we work with parents, because if you're snuggling with your child in your bed, which I will say for me personally is one of the greatest parenting highs ever. I mean, that is just awesome. And who doesn't want to do that? And then the parent falls asleep in the child's bed. And then the child learns that I can only sleep when my parent is next to me. So it's really tricky because we want kids to learn to go to sleep without the parent there. But we don't want the parents and kids to give up that snuggle time,
right.
That closeness that is just such a parenting pleasure. So we really advocate for, please do that snuggling, but don't do it in bed.
That's right.
Do it downstairs before you start the routine, snuggle on the couch, do all that. Do not miss that wonderful time because it's so important for kids and parents. But doing it in bed at night when the parent is exhausted is really not conducive for independent sleeping.
Right.
And, I guess along this, like the conversation, and I think it's even mentioned quite a few times in the book itself, but, it's making this concept, it's applying a lot of the CBT foundations into this but making it in that approachable way, as Ray was just saying, and it's digestible. And so whether that's changing, the parenting style language from so many classes, and still I hear, authoritative versus authoritarian. I'm like, okay, which one's which, and we have this language that makes it now much more approachable. It's like, okay, yep, I know exactly which one, and functional. And that, that's, I think the overall experience of the book is it feels very functional. And the last chapter, talking about, and I think it was kind of that, now that this is implemented, here's the ways that you can build off of that. And, part of that is if it is grandma's house, if it is, a friend's house, if it is, hey, we have to maybe change rooms or, or have to sleep on the couch for, whatever, like it just allows for this adaptability. And, and in the therapy office, that's what we're constantly doing is how do we create, a sense of confidence for individuals that as challenges arise, they can meet their own needs and they can, navigate these, and it doesn't have to be 100% success, but as they're going through, they're going to experience it and they're going to be more open to taking these risks. And, I think the book does a beautiful job of blending that and kind of giving it to the parents as a resource that they're able to use. So, I think even in the process of reading, I brought up certain parts of the conversation. One client I can think of who, she lost her childhood stuffed animal, and it was, nighttime has been a challenge and it's been rough. And pulling on some of the, the coping skills and being able to, share some of those strategies with parents of like, here's how we promote this independence. And so, I think it's also a useful tool for our practitioners, whether they're promoting it and kind of sharing it as a resource for parents or even kind of building it into their practice themselves. It doesn't have to just be, only self-help. I think it can certainly kind of be a complementary tool in the therapy offices and therapy setting.
Yeah, we certainly hope so. I mean, we really wanted this to be very accessible and user-friendly, a really user-friendly 6-week plan for parents. But we do also think that there is a tremendous use from therapists and others who are working to sort of manage children's sleep. So we certainly do hope that it's helpful to practitioners as well.
And I know it's covered, but, for our listeners, one thing, and this is kind of jumping back, I think, to parts of the beginning, but technology use and the impact that can have, certainly I think there's many different, sleep apps and, meditation apps, but at the same time, we're getting more screen time exposure. And so, in terms of parents that maybe are trying to implement this, like, what's the potential impact of having, screens, especially pairing screens with bedtime?
It's a tricky thing to balance because certainly you mentioned some tools that can be really helpful at bedtime. Even the progressive muscle relaxation script that we have in our book, there are many examples of that found online video options where you can listen to it and you don't need someone to read the script to the child. And they can really be helpful, but of course, in moderation. So Ellen and I, we write in our book that we don't believe that technology belongs in the child's bedroom. And we even recommend to parents that they model that as well and keep technology out of the parental bedroom to really drive that message home to children, because children who are exposed to the blue light, we know that can be disruptive to the circadian rhythm, and exposure to social media and a variety of content online can certainly be disruptive to sleep. And the technology is designed to hold your focus and not put that device down. And so when you're faced with something that's really exciting or interesting, and all it takes is a scroll, it's going to be really tempting to keep going and at the risk of losing sleep over it. So Ellen and I recommend to parents that they help their children avoid screen time at bedtime, keep the technology and devices out of the bedroom as much as possible. And if it is being utilized in a way to promote sleep, that, there be some significant oversight with that.
Yeah, I love the recommendation about keeping it out of the bedroom completely. It's I've said that for a long time in some of the work we do with media and device use. That it's an important boundary, and I feel like every week I have the conversation that you can buy an alarm clock, that's not on your phone. Like they do still make them. They're online. They're at Walmart. Because that's usually the time. Like, well, that's how I wake up in the morning. Well, we've got other options there, that won't ding and tell you when somebody else is sending you a Snapchat. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. I mean, it's such a simple boundary, but I do find that it's actually a very difficult one for parents, not only for implementing with their kids, but for themselves. It's definitely something many people have gotten into a habit. But I love that addition to the book because I think it's one I hear often.
And removing that temptation, there's a number of individuals that it's, or parents, families, we're transitioning well into bedtime. But then I hear them like an hour later and I hear, something going on, whether it's YouTube or, trying to, play video games or, but whatever that may be. And so just removing access is one of the most effective, if the most effective way. If it's not there, they're not going to use it. So, just to echo that one more time.
One of the things this is something I think kind of early in the book, and maybe we should have talked about a little earlier, but I'm always interested in the kind of misinformation that parents get from doing their own Google searches and all of those things. What's some of the kind of myths or misconceptions around sleep that you all hear from parents?
I would say the first one that comes to my mind is both parent and children share this particular concern, but the dreadful consequences that will follow a night in which there is not sufficient sleep. So parents are concerned about their own sleep loss, and they probably should be. And they're also incredibly concerned about, what if my child doesn't sleep? I'd rather sleep in bed with my child to ensure that they're getting good sleep than risk a night of imperfect sleep. And so, I like to suggest to parents that, it is no fun slogging through a day after you haven't had adequate sleep, but it's certainly not a tragedy to be tired after, a night of imperfect sleep. So, and there are a lot of sort of negative parenting, behaviors that come out of that belief. So if I think it's really dangerous, my child's academics are going to go to pot, all these terrible things will happen if my child doesn't get the amount of sleep that they need for a day. And it's just not the case. In fact, if the child has less sleep one day, they're likely to sort of catch up the next. So it could make bedtime, tomorrow's bedtime a little bit easier. But I would say that that's the first one that comes to my mind.
Another misconception about children's sleep that we often encounter is that this belief on the part of parents who think that children need to be on board with this independent sleep plan in order to be able to carry it out. And it's not necessarily true. Parents can do a lot without the explicit, agreement from their child. Because who could blame the child for wanting their bedtime to keep going as is if they are comfortable with it? If they enjoy sleeping in the same bed as their parent and they don't want that to change, who could blame them? But if change is going to take place, it's going to have to be on the part of the parent, and there is a lot that they can do to turn things around.
I think that's a great point. I think sometimes we think that teaming with kids means that kids have to agree 100% with the plan. I think that's such an empowering thing to tell parents, that it's okay if your child has some resistance to it. And it's okay if they have a bad night's sleep, and even 2 and even probably 5's not the end of the world. It will get better. And I think that, that those misconceptions, they're what maintain, I think, some of the bad routines that we have. That's glad you shared that. I think that's extremely important for parents to just have that permission.
And as well as motivation, like I can't help it. And might be like the first few pages of the book, but it was like, oh, if you're picking up this book, you might be tired. There might be, like some uncomfortable nights spent either on your child's floor in their bed, or, you have their feet in your face in your bed, like that kind of thing. As well as the impact it can have on, the relationship for parents. And, if it feels like there's a disruption in intimacy in terms of being able to also just connect and unwind at the end of the day for the parents. And so I think, not only the benefit for the children, but the benefit for the parents themselves in establishing some healthy routines and expectations is invaluable. And, I really appreciated that was one of the first pieces that was mentioned. And, I think it's also certainly a hook for parents. Yeah, that's me. That's also, yeah. So I think that's just a wealth of knowledge and so many potential benefits for someone who's struggling with banishing the bedtime battles.
Yeah. So as we're kind of getting close to the end here, maybe let's kind of summarize a little bit. Are there some examples of maybe some big picture changes that parents can kind of look to make with their child's bedtime routine? And I know we want them to buy the book to get the final piece, but what are maybe a couple of tips we could kind of share with parents on changes they should look to make?
I would say there's sort of two principal ideas. And if you're sleeping in your child's bed, or they're sleeping in your bed, or some other variant that is not acceptable to you at nighttime, you want to create distance at nighttime between you and your child, because you are likely like assigned stimulus for your child. Your presence is required for them to be able to fall asleep. And so you need to begin to create some distance using a procedure that we call shaping. So I know that you're familiar with shaping, but sort of slowly and gradually modifying behavior so it gets closer and closer to what you're desiring, which is greater distance and freedom from your child at night. So, if you're sleeping in your child's bedroom, a parent might move out of the bed, but sit in a chair very close to the bed for a few nights. So they're still physically there. The child is still able to fall asleep if they require their parents' presence, but, gradually across nights and or a few weeks, although you don't want to draw it out too long, that parent's really creating additional distance, and probably also decreasing the time that they're spending with the child, all with the purpose of leaving when the child becomes first, they're very drowsy, they're almost asleep. Maybe that's when the parent leaves the bedroom. And then maybe they're sort of awake, but quite relaxed. And that's when the parent leaves the bedroom until ultimately, the child's able to get into bed without the parent being present at all. So those are the two principles that I think would be really helpful for parents. One, increasing the distance from your child in a gradual fashion, and also decreasing the time that you're spending with your child as they're preparing for sleep.
Yeah, I would. Okay, so one really common bedtime battle is what Ellen and I refer to as curtain calling. And that is when a child has already been put to bed, tucked in, they've said goodnight, and the parent has left the room. But the child either repeatedly calls out for the parent, or repeatedly gets up, or is otherwise kind of making a lot of noise and potentially seeking some attention or reassurance from parents. And so if that's happening, it often can be annoying or frustrating for parents who are certainly busy, taking care of all of the household tasks. And so I would encourage parents to talk with their child if they have a child who's doing this, outside of bedtime, maybe at breakfast or some other time in the day where things are feeling calm, talk with the child about what's going on for them when they are alone in their bed, and what are they thinking about and what are they feeling that might be leading to them looking for some support from their parent at night, and just start a conversation and see what that experience might be like for the child. And it could give you some good insight into how to support them to be more independent from that point forward.
It's great. And, I, again, kind of really appreciate the book. And, I think, we've talked about a few techniques, but I think parents that are interested, I think the other value to this is, just how much your program can be tailored to meet kind of the needs of parents. And that, it's not really this one size fits all, although there's some specific steps. Parents can really personalize it. And I think that's a great value for people to do. I think it makes it much easier and more digestible for parents to implement. So, again, kind of thank you for sharing all of this. As we wrap up, we like to ask our guests 3 questions that we refer to as our kind of takeaways. And so we're just going to kind of go through each one, let you both answer. So, we're called the Psych to Practice podcast. So we're always interested in hearing what keeps people psyched to do what they do. So maybe we'll start with the first one with you, Chelsea. What keeps you psyched to do what you're doing?
Getting to work with children and families every day is incredible. I have the best job in the world. I always tell my child clients that I work with, one-to-one, that anxiety, which is what I specialize in the treatment of, is so treatable. And when they first come in and they learn that there's someone who understands what is going on for them and that it's treatable, they are all in. They are completely bought into treatment and they can't get enough. And I'm just so happy to be a part of that. And soon I know that this book is going to help Ellen and I reach an even bigger audience and help more children and families. And that's what keeps me so psyched.
Great. How about you, Ellen?
I would say I am super psyched about supporting child mental health and wellness. I mean, I have a variety of tasks and a variety of roles, but what they all really center on is supporting families and helping parents to raise mentally healthy and confident, competent, independent children. And Chelsea kind of stole my answer. I mean, that is just so incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. And so with the other thing we like to kind of hear from people, if you could pick one kind of source of content, it can be a book, it can be a movie, a TV show, and it doesn't have to be related to psychology, but something that you think's worth people listening to. What's something you would share, Ellen?
Mine's super easy. It is this phenomenal website that comes along with podcasts and a text messaging service that's absolutely free. The website, I'll give you the name and then I'll describe what it is. The website address is The Greatest 8. That's the number 8, thegreatest8.org. So The Greatest 8 is an initiative that's designed to help parents and caregivers build 8 sort of core competencies in kids. These 8 core skills are all designed to support child mental health and wellness for the child's lifetime. It's a fantastic resource for parents and caregivers and anyone who's involved with kids. And I also did have a hand in helping to create the initiative, though I certainly did not do it alone. So I just wanted to let everyone know I am a little bit biased, but it is a fantastic resource, thegreatest8.org.
Great. How about you, Chelsea?
I was going to shamelessly plug Banish Bedtime Battles, but Ellen's recommendation sparked me to think about this resource for families called at the website understood.org. Incredible resource for helping parents, children, school staff, even therapists. I reference it a lot. It's for helping children with thinking and learning differences and helping families navigate special school supports, 504s and IEPs. There's sample IEPs for various difficulties that children may have at school. And then there's just a wealth of information there that I find myself turning to time and time again.
Great resources. I think parents, we always love giving out websites because they're just so accessible. So thank you both for those. And kind of our last question is we like to get kind of 3 gems or takeaways that you've learned in your career that you think are important that our listeners might be interested in, and those specifically in the mental health field. So Chelsea, we're going to kind of start with you. What would your 3 kind of clinician gems be?
Let's see. Okay. I think I would say that it is so important to actively listen to children when they are expressing themselves, expressing concern about something that, adults might think is minor, but really listen and acknowledge how that child is feeling, validate their feelings. I always say feelings are okay. All feelings are okay, but it's how we express those feelings that really matters in terms of being able to process it in a healthy way. So listening to kids, I've learned by observation, really, that trying to talk a child out of being upset or nervous is not going to help them manage their emotions. Listening does more than trying to do that. And my third one would be don't underestimate a child's ability to learn healthy coping skills for managing big emotions at an early age. They're so capable and ready to learn how to manage difficult or new situations on their own if you give them the right tools.
Great. And Ellen, what are your 3?
I would say that if you are trying to change child behavior, perhaps more of the work is with the parents versus with the child. Not to blame parents, but parents have way more power than they know in helping to modify their child's behavior, because parents are usually expecting the child to change. And I'm always saying, it's great news that we don't have to, have the child want to change. Parents have a lot of control, and the work is often theirs when it comes to child behavior change. So that's one. Number 2, I would say, is taking a strengths-based approach. I love Chelsea's answer about really recognizing that kids are tremendously capable of using coping skills. That's something I often want to impress upon a child's parents. I too work with anxious kids. Anxious kids sometimes have anxious parents who sometimes underestimate their child's ability to cope. So really taking that strength-based approach is super useful. And the last tip I have involves a story. I'll try to keep it brief, but Phil Kendall, as I mentioned earlier, was my mentor in grad school. And I was going on internship interviews, and I went on a series of interviews. And when I returned, Phil said to me, "Ellen, how did they go?" And I said, Phil, I had this really amazing one where I found just coincidentally, my interviewer had his hair cut by my grandfather, who was a barber. It was just this amazing coincidence that happened. And of course, when you connect around some shared, experience like that, the interview went really well. And so I said to Phil, it's just luck. Like, I just got so lucky. That interview went so well. And he said to me, the most important thing I ever learned in graduate school, he said, Ellen, that's not luck, that's skill. And I have used that tidbit in connecting with every single client. I look for those connections in a skillful way. You know, what is it that we can connect on, or where are our shared experiences or commonalities to really capitalize on that? I don't think of it as luck anymore.
Yeah, that's a great way to end. We talk about connection often on this show, and it seems to be a running theme that we always get to. So that's a great example. Both Ellen and Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us and talking a little bit about sleep. And I'm excited that parents will have your book available. Banish Bedtime Battles, I think, is going to be a great resource. And if I'm right, that's coming out in June. Is that correct? Yeah. So I hope our listeners check it out. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
It's been a lot of fun.
And, just echo that, thank you for being here and sharing your insight and knowledge, and just the book. I think it's just going to be a great resource. And for our listeners, if they're interested in learning more or staying up to date with what's going on for you both, is there any social media or anything that you think would be valuable for our listeners to go and check out? I know you both shared two wonderful resources, but anything else, especially if they're trying to interested to learn more about you both?
Absolutely. So they can connect with us on Instagram. The Instagram handle is High Performance Parenting, all one word. And our website is highperformance-parenting.com. So Instagram, all one word, High Performance Parenting. And then the website has the dash between performance and parenting.
We'll certainly hope that, that they're able to check out that resource. Just hear with what's going on and staying up to date. Speaking of, if you're interested in hearing more and staying up to date with the Psych to Practice podcast, be sure to check out our website, www.psychtopractice.com, as well as following us on all major social media by searching Psych to Practice. We'll be back in 2 weeks, but until then, be well and stay psyched.